of Parliament trying to get to the bottom of how the cuts for literacy, court challenges, women and minorities will affect Canadians. They're attempting to determine the true rationale for those actions which Canadians see as a mean-spirited attack on their volunteer and meritorious activities. That's the role of members of Parliament. It's the function of democracy. Conservative ministers are muzzling public servants. They're showing a deep-seated respect for Parliament and for Canadians. Why aren't members of Parliament allowed to hear from the public servants they need to hear from in order to do their jobs, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable the President of the Treasury Board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth. We strongly believe in accountability. That's why I, my Deputy Minister, my Assistant Deputy Minister, all appeared before the Government Operations Committee last week, Mr. Speaker. My colleagues have appeared before numerous committees. I believe the Minister of Human Resources and Development will be appearing before 2 committees this week. I understand the Minister of Public Works and Government Services will be appearing before committee. All of this with their officials, Mr. Speaker. In the previous Parliament, Mr. Speaker, we couldn't find a Liberal minister who would ever agree to go before a committee. Now at this side, now in this government, Mr. Speaker, we're only too happy to be accountable before committees.
Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, members of the Foreign Affairs and Defence Committees can testify that I was there as regularly as they asked me, Mr. Speaker. As was every other minister. On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has muzzled his ministers, he's muzzled his caucus, the media suffers his wrath, and now he's muzzling public servants. Why, in spite of all his political rhetoric, is the Prime Minister showing such contempt for the democratic process so essential to the integrity of this House? Why such fear of candour? Will the Prime Minister now order his ministers to allow committees of this House to hear from any public servants they need to hear from so they can do the jobs that at least they, Mr. Speaker, were elected to do?
Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is utterly bizarre from the Leader of the Opposition complaining that ministers are willing to come to committee and answer questions from members of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I think the reason for these kinds of ridiculous questions is the Leader of the Opposition would like to cover up what his friends over in the Senate are doing. They're trying to change the Accountability Act to create a separate Senate ethics officer. They want to delay the coming into force of provisions on political donations for a year. They want to increase the amount of money that can be given to political parties. They want to grandfather political staff that shouldn't have been appointed in the first place, contrary to what Gomery recommended. They're being completely unaccountable.
The Honourable Member for Westmount Ville-Marie. Mr. Speaker, the contempt of this Conservative government for Montreal is more and more obvious. Yesterday, neither the Prime Minister nor the Parliamentary Secretary were able to give us one example of an achievement of Michael Fortier of Montreal. I can give you an example of failure. No plan for our special sector and nothing for the job losses in Bombardier. All of the people agree. When will the minister responsible for Montreal, will he confirm the policy for the aerospatial sector? The Honourable Minister of Industry. Mr. Speaker, I have a lot of sympathy or empathy for the workers who lost their jobs, but that being said, Mr. Speaker, we don't have to learn any lessons from the Liberals, because 4 days before the last election was called, Mr. Speaker, the Liberals tabled a so-called plan to help these workers, but it was an empty plan. It was an empty plan that was simply opportunistic. So, Mr. Speaker, they were simply buying votes. The Honourable Member for Westmount Ville-Marie. Mr. Speaker, this plan had been prepared by one of the people who is now sitting on their side today. And so we see that there has been a delay for hundreds of millions of dollars that was to go to investing in research in the aerospatial sector. $42 million was put into this program to help the industry, but the Conservatives have abandoned the works and they are doing nothing for the economic development of Montreal. So how can the minister who is in charge of Montreal, how can he justify such negligence? When will he finally give a positive answer to all of these projects that are piling up on his desk? The Honourable Minister of Industry. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government spent 13 years wasting public money and just putting money into its own coffers. 13 years of neglect for the aerospatial sector. And now this government will ensure that we will have $13 billion in economic spin-offs for the aerospace sector. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Mr. Speaker, over the next 3 days there will be a social economic forum that will in Mastuash. A few federal ministers have confirmed that they will be attending, including the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development. However, the Government of Canada is one of the only countries who voted against the Declaration on Indigenous Peoples on the Human Rights Council. Isn't the Prime Minister uncomfortable to send his Minister of Indian Affairs to co-chair this forum when in fact his government is prepared to vote once again against this Declaration on Indigenous Peoples, this time before the UN General Assembly? The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Indian Affairs, well, I'm very proud to have this Minister representing the Government of Canada along with his counterparts from the province of Quebec, and as well as several members from this House. Mr. Speaker, this government has some concerns with respect to the declaration quoted by the Leader of the Bloc, because this declaration does not respect the Canadian Constitution, and as the Leader of the Bloc knows, this government always respects the Canadian Constitution. The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Mr. Speaker, all parties here in this House studied this question very seriously, and 3 of the 4 parties understood. For a long time now, Canada should have been supporting this declaration. Can the Prime Minister tell us clearly that this is not about the Constitution? This has nothing to do with the declaration. The Prime Minister should tell us, is it not rather that he doesn't respect the First Nations of Quebec and Canada? The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Once again, Mr. Speaker, there is no previous government that signed this agreement. There were some problems, so the government has had some difficulty with some of the sections of this declaration, but we are working to improve this agreement. But, Mr. Speaker, it is necessary for a government to point this out and to take position. The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about something concrete, if that's what the Prime Minister wants. At the Mastuash Forum, the Aboriginal people will point out concerns for the future with respect to health, with respect to social problems, with respect to the economy. In a nutshell, many problems will be discussed. Can the federal government, which will be participating in this forum, and reassure us that it will not go empty-handed to Mastuash and that it will come up with some concrete solutions for these issues? The Honourable Minister of Indian Affairs. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned yesterday, I'm very proud to co-chair the Socio-Economic Forum in Quebec, in Mastuash, with my counterpart from Quebec. I am very confident that my colleagues and I will be able to contribute significantly to ensure that the situation of the Aboriginal people in Quebec improves. We will take concrete steps in order to improve the quality of life of all. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Mr. Speaker, in concrete terms, last Friday in Mastuash there was a very important workshop on housing, one of the most important issues facing the Aboriginal people today. According to our information, the Minister of Indian Affairs apparently left the conference before this workshop was held. Can he assure us that, given the importance of this issue, that he will take it upon himself to be there in Mastuash? The Minister of Indian Affairs.
Of going to Mastuash, I will be there for most of the next several days, along with a number of my colleagues from the province of Quebec. Contrary to what was taken place under the former government, this government is committed to housing. In the last and first budget of this Conservative government, there was a total of $600 million put forward for housing, 300 in respect of northern housing, 300 million in respect of off-reserve housing. One of the priority items that I have worked with, together with the Assembly of First Nations, relates to the provision of on-reserve housing, and we are making significant progress, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Toronto Danforth.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to free speech, it turns out that this Prime Minister seems to have a double standard. Free speech for people he agrees with, and gag orders for people that he doesn't agree with. And the best example is the wheat board. So far, the government has changed the rules halfway through on the election, imposed a gag order, and arbitrarily struck thousands of farmers off the voters list. Will this Prime Minister stop bullying Canadian farmers and commit to this House that there will be a free and fair vote on the Canadian Wheat Board?
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Mr. Speaker, in the upcoming Wheat Board elections, which is, I think, what the member is referring to, the recommendation that I made to the Canadian Wheat Board was exactly consistent with what the Wheat Board's own election panel recommended 1 year ago in November. They said that actual producers should be voting in the directors, or for the directors, not just someone who has a permit book. Mr. Speaker, we continue to listen to Canadian farmers. They have the right to vote in this upcoming directors election, and we're giving them that right.
The honourable member for Toronto Danforth.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, the government is taking away the rights of farmers who leave their fields fallow, who run other crops, who hold their wheat for the next year to get a better price, who had bad rain, who had bad drought. That's what they're doing to the farmers across the country. And killing the wheat board will produce serious financial loss for everyday grain producers. Thank goodness Gary Doer's government's standing up and going to hold a referendum. Thank goodness the government of Saskatchewan's going to take the federal government to court if need be to get them to do the right thing. So to the Prime Minister, will there be a free and fair vote for farmers on the wheat board? Yes or no?
Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this party and this government will never be afraid of the voices of Western farmers. That's why we represent virtually every rural seat in Western Canada. Mr. Speaker, I know that the leader of the NDP and ourselves disagree on marketing choice for Western Canadian farmers, but I think what we hopefully do agree on is that whether people are for or against the wheat board or want the wheat board the same or to change, that they have a right to know what the wheat board is doing. We put the wheat board under access to information in the Accountability Act. The unelected Liberal Senate took it out. Mr. Speaker, that is a disgrace. The wheat board should be subject to access to
The honourable member for Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, the Foreign Minister is well aware of the offensive remark that has placed him in difficulty for the past 6 days. Last Thursday, in reference to a comment about a dog, he pointed toward the seat of another honourable member and said, "You already have heard." This being the Minister's first opportunity to do so, will he simply withdraw that remark and offer this House an apology?
The Honourable the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member opposite for the question. Obviously, I was traveling abroad with other members of this House of Commons on international obligations. I made no such gesture. I made no derogatory or discriminatory remark towards any member of this House, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, that the offending remark was made is undeniable, and it cannot be claimed that just because Hansard didn't catch it, it never happened. Members of this House witnessed it. Audio tapes recorded it. The news media have repeatedly confirmed it. Every significant women's organization in this country have condemned it. The Minister might want to look at an editorial in today's Montreal Gazette to assess the damage that he is doing. Would it not be wise to stop the denials, acknowledge this mistake, apologize, and avoid doing more harm to himself and his government?
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
You looked into this matter, Mr. Speaker, and you ruled on it last week. And I think all members of the House should respect your ruling. In addition, now the Minister has addressed the issue, and I think that should end us.
The Honourable
member for Notre-Dame-de-Grâce-Lachine.
A long list of women's groups agree. the Minister of Foreign Affairs must apologize for the disparaging remark he made in the House last Thursday. His sexist remark, which he is now denying having made today, goes beyond decorum. It speaks to a fundamental lack of respect for women. This minister and the Prime Minister must both refuse to apologize. Why are they endorsing such disrespect to Canadian women and to members of Parliament in this House?
The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
The decorum in the House is the responsibility of all members. And with respect to the issue the member has raised, you looked into this matter last week, Mr. Speaker. You ruled on it. I think all members of the House should respect your ruling, and now the Minister himself has addressed the matter, and I think that should end it.
Member for Notre-Dame-de-Grâce-les-Chines. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that women are not a priority for this Conservative minority government. He did away with women's programs and denies it. The minister had very sexist remarks, and he denies this. And now, today in the House, he's denying this. When will they stop denying reality? And when will the Minister of Foreign Affairs assume his responsibility? That is, the responsibility for his behavior, which was very contemptuous to women and to this House. The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to women. In fact, we're asking every member in this House to stand with this government and to work on behalf of women. Work with our Justice Minister, who's going to make our streets safer. Work with the Immigration Minister, who's going to deal with the victims of trafficking. Work with the Aboriginal Affairs Minister, who's going to bring matrimonial property rights to Aboriginal women. Work with our Finance Minister, who's going to reduce taxes for all women. In fact, Mr. Speaker, this is real action. This is standing up for women.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny, Lilin, Kamouraska, Rivière, Doulou. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In January 2005 and in May 2006, Quebec lost 2,000 jobs in the manufacturing sector. So the crisis is hitting not only textile, bicycles, and the shoe sector, but also Norsk, Hydro, and Bombardier. Can the Minister of Industry tell us about his strategy to put an end to this exodus of jobs as we see? The Honourable Minister of Labour. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking of Norsk Hydro, I would like to point out to this House that the Mauricie region is eligible for the 6 new tools that we have made available. And I'd like to point out to the employees that the fund that was set up a few weeks ago is something very interesting. There's also the marketing fund and the Economic Development Initiative. So we are going to review the file, and while the Bloc shouts that says we do nothing, we have done something to help these regions. The Honourable Member for Montmagny, Lily, Kamouraska, Rivière. But in addition, the Minister said that he believes that the market can resolve everything by itself, but some players say that this is social dumping. This is why the WTO allows for safeguard measures, as Europe and the United States did, particularly in the textile and clothing sector. Why is Canada refusing to follow their examples when jobs are lost and when the market laws are being upset? It's the whole textile industry that's suffering. Mr. Speaker, we believe that by creating an environment that is good for all companies in Canada, as we did in our last budget, we have got now new taxes that can apply to help this. So this is more money that's put in the companies' pocketbooks, and this will allow them to be competitive and so that we have the best companies in the world. What we did, and what the Bloc can never do, Mr. Speaker, since they are always in opposition.
The Honourable Member for Bas-Richelieu, Nicolet Bécancourt. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The closure of Norsk Hydro affects hundreds of workers in my riding and deprives them of good salaries. Although solutions to help the employees in this company are not obvious at all, some, like the Mayor of Bécancourt and the Government of Quebec and the labour unions, are looking for solutions that would make use of these qualified workers. My question is a simple one. Does the federal government intend to participate in some concrete way in this project and associate itself with these dynamic people who want the best for their company? The Honourable Minister of Labour. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, let me remind my colleague that indeed, as Minister of Regional Economic Development, I had one priority, and that was to implement new tools that mean that entrepreneurs don't have to fight to deal with that tool, that it be really accessible. In the last month, we implemented 6 new tools for regions in difficulty with a drop in demographics. 2 programs that come to mind is the Fund for Succession in Enterprises, and Desjardins is associated with us, and the Vitality Program and other measures. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. It's no secret that China can produce cheap magnesium because it does not respect its environment. It has no workplace health and safety measures, nor any respect for the fundamental rights of its workers. Therefore, China is practicing what's called social dumping. Does the government intend to do something new to avoid having other companies go through the same thing that Norsk Hydro is going through? The Honourable Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, let me remind the House that our function is not to start up companies, but to put in place tools that help entrepreneurs or people who want to start up companies, who want to expand. This is why in the past few months, and since I got here as minister, we've tried to put forth these new tools. That's what we did. There are 6. Those that are seeing a drop in population are fully eligible to these tools to make sure that the employees of these entrepreneurs are being supported.
Valley West.
To salvage her clean air disaster, the Minister of the Environment has been misquoting the Canadian Lung Association. What the Lung Association really said was that it, quote, has serious concerns that the proposed approach under the Clean Air Act will not reduce emissions of greenhouse gases quickly enough to lessen the health effects of climate change. Mr. Speaker, misleading the House like this shows this minister's utter disrespect for Parliament. Why did the Minister of the Environment misrepresent the real position of the Lung Association?
The Honourable, the Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that the Honourable Member likes to pull things out of the Lung Association's press release, but they did say, in fact, that they are in favour of the Clean Air Act to regulate indoor air because it's one of the largest health risks associated with lung cancer for non-smokers. They are concerned about some of the health impacts of climate change, and we're working with them and many other organizations to address those issues.
The Honourable Member for Don Valley West.
Well, it's not just the Lung Association that the Minister represents. Yesterday she claimed that the Federation of Canadian Municipalities supported the Clean Air Act. Again, Mr. Speaker, not accurate. Not once in the FCM press release is there any mention of the Clean Air Act. In fact, the FCM said after the Minister tabled her flawed act, and I quote, "We don't need to wait for new legislation to begin working in partnership." Mr. Speaker, the House cannot accept this kind of continual misrepresentation on the part of the Minister. Will she apologize for repeatedly misleading the House?
The Honourable, the Minister of the Environment.
I'm happy to repeat exactly what I said, which was that the opposition should listen to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities that said, quote, "Recent announcements signal that the present federal government is prepared to take a leadership role and develop environmental plan capable of delivering tangible results."
The Honourable Member for Saint-Boniface.
The minority Conservative government is showing blatant contempt towards farmers. Earlier this month, the Prime Minister, whose disdain for the Canadian Wheat Board is legendary, slapped the Wheat Board with a gag order, preventing it from advocating for its single desk selling. When he was president of the National Citizens Coalition, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "Gag laws are unconstitutional and unenforceable." So isn't the Prime Minister today doing what he found so distasteful not that long ago.
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Of course, there's no such thing. The directors of the Wheat Board are speaking out as they should and as they're allowed to. Farmers across the country are talking to me and to others about what they think the future of the Wheat Board should look like. But, Mr. Speaker, that's not the real big question. The big question today is, why today did the unelected Senate vote to remove the right of farmers to access to information, access to the Canadian Wheat Board? Why, I don't know which is worse, Mr. Speaker, the fact that they don't think farmers should know what's going on, or the fact that they lost the right to know by an unelected Senate.
The Honourable Member for St. Boniface. Order, please.
I know it's hard to believe, Mr. Speaker, but this government is showing even more contempt for farmers.
No, it's not.
Western producers have been demanding a plebiscite. The Canadian Wheat Board clearly states that a vote should be held. Both Manitoba and Saskatchewan have indicated that they would hold a vote if the federal government fails to fulfill its responsibilities. When will this government do the democratic and lawful thing and put the question to a vote by farmers?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
The Honourable Member is presupposing that he knows what's in the task force report, which should be delivered shortly, Mr. Speaker. When that task force report is tabled with me, of course, I will make it public. It'll aid in the discussion and in the debate that's already taking place on the prairies. But, Mr. Speaker, again, that's not the issue. The issue is, why don't they want Canadian farmers, Western Canadian farmers, to know what's going on at the Wheat Board? Why did the unelected Senate take the right of farmers to know away? What's wrong? What are they afraid of? Why don't they want farmers to know what's going on at the Wheat Board?
The Honourable Member for St. Catharines.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in St. Catharines are distressed with a justice system put in place by the former Liberal government that doesn't appear to give our government the tools to keep Canada from becoming a dumping ground for dangerous offenders and people who commit crimes in other countries.
What a shame.
Can the Minister of Public Safety give this House an update on what is being done to rectify this situation and protect all Canadians?
Honourable the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, we don't want to become a dumping ground from the United States.
A haven for pedophiles or others who commit serious crimes in the United States and then come to Canada. And we've been using every legal instrument possible to try and detain and declare as inadmissible the individual that my colleague is concerned about. What I've been finding, Mr. Speaker, is over the last decade and a half, the Liberals created, through quite an array of protective measures, a system that makes it easier for criminals to come in here and hard to get them out. We want them, Mr. Speaker, today they could agree with raising the age of protection to 14 to...
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Yesterday, the Minister refused to even reveal her funding plans for Skippy for the fiscal years 2007 through 2009. And the President of the Treasury Board had the audacity to claim, and I quote, "This government has no intention of cutting Skippy." Yet the Minister's published priority and planning report states that they are leaving only $2.2 million for the program. Mr. Speaker, if the Minister does not consider $131 million lost from one year to the next a cut, what is a cut?
The Honourable the Minister of Social Development.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the one disadvantage that the Honourable Member has is that she doesn't understand government numbers because she'll never be in government. But, Mr. Speaker, let me explain. Mr. Speaker, the numbers that are posted on the website reflect the allocations that have already been made. Because we're still looking at ways to improve the homelessness program, the decisions have not been made. We don't want to be premature in that. Once we've made the decisions, once we've allocated the funds, they'll be there.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, I was a cabinet minister. I still failed to explain why 99% of the budget has been slashed for programs that provide services for emergency shelters, traditional housing, and homelessness prevention. Why is the government claiming that there isn't a cut when we all know that there has been? This is an all-out assault on affordable housing and homeless people in this country. Will this government commit to affordable housing and fully fund the National Housing Initiative by replacing $131 million
All of it!
The Honourable, the Minister of Human Resources and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, we have indicated many times our concern for the homeless. That's why we extended the National Housing Initiative as one of our first moves. That's why we made $37 million available to it that hadn't been spent by the previous government. That's why, Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to support the homeless, and we're not going to do it in the way of the government that bankrupted Ontario.